Hello guys, how's it going? This is Paul from Flutter. Today I'll be talking about the stateful part of our app. On our last video, we talked about the navigations and everything. We are going to be using navigation on our food delivery app. So on this video, it's mainly on states. So on also talking about states, you know that states and in Flutter actually works with the build context and as well navigation. Though I didn't bring in the build context on the navigation tutorial, but here I'm going to try to explain that, and yeah, and probably show you how that is going to link to the state management solutions we are going to be using, and as well our current navigation we are using as well now. And before I go there, let me show you some structures here we'll be following. Talking about the build context, here's a diagram that I'm going to use to explain that. So what is the build context? The build context is more like a location or a reference of our widget in the widget tree, of a single widget in the widget tree. Yes, let's get that. And as you can see in this diagram here, every widget in this diagram has its own build context. From the top you see the my app, and the color yellow here, you see that from here down to the widgets it carries all of that. If you stay here and try to access the build context from the my app, you can get that because the build context is actually there. The context of my app is actually there, and the material app, that's how all the widgets here has their own separate build context. And like an example to that, how the build context works, you can take a look at the scaffold and the snack bar. So if you want to display a particular snack bar, you want to display a snack bar. If you don't call a snack bar, maybe you want to do scaffold dot of context, and you try to access the snack bar, so you can display that snack bar like show snack bar. And if that's particular call is not located in the scaffold build context, that is going to throw you in null. Like if that call you're actually calling it maybe in this text, you have a callback in this text that when you click on it, it's access this. If you click on it, that's going to work very fine. You're going to see your snack bar. But if you should call that snack bar on maybe my home page or material app, you see that that is not going to get called. Just like we have our navigation, here. You can see in our project that we use our navigator here, and if you try to call the context, you can try to call context and try to navigate from the material app, you see that you're going to have a problem because the context is starting from here, and every widget within this ungenerated route is going to listen to that context and follow that. So the build context is very good when we talk about the flow of our app and how states move along the widget tree, because when our app gets really big and we have separate widgets, we don't need to always pass in data to the next widget, passing data to the next widget. We can just use the context and locate anywhere we want to send that data to, and the state of that widget is going to change according to that. So talking about the state management solution of our app, and I'm thinking that we are going to be using the provider, and as well we are going to be using the block pattern as well. So I'm going to create two repositories on our GitHub, and I'm going to create those two branches, and we are going to fill in the codes. We are going to fill in the codes for that. You are among this, so you're going to be writing code as well. If you need me to add that to the tutorial, that's sure I'm going to add that and maybe bring you online and we talk about it. I really want this to be very interactive. And yeah, I'll just take you to pub.dev here, where we have the provider. I don't know if a lot of you know about the provider. The provider is actually it's kind of a wrapper around inherited widget, and inherited widget is it uses the build context to pass data along the widget tree, and you can access data anywhere when you actually register it on the parent and you want to pass data anywhere in the children widget trees. So that's how it's going to work. And as well, we are going to use the block package, and as well the Flutter block to roll with this. I'm very happy that you are with me here. And for the diagram here, you can see on our diagram, this is how we are going to use the state for both the provider and for both the block, the provider and block too. So this is how our pattern is going to be. I actually bring this out to the structure we are having here, where we have the models, we have the repositories, and we have the screens. So this parts are the important parts, where you can see here the UI, the state, the data, and every screen on our app has its own state, because we don't want, as our app get initialized or our app starts, all the screens state are all active. We don't want that. We want when maybe we have this home screen that it starts and we have that state ready, and maybe want to go to a detail screen. When we go to that detail screen, we create that state, and when we leave there, we dispose that state. We don't want the situation we always create state and pile up states all over the app. So we don't want that. So this is how we are going to do it. We are going to have the UI. The UI can be a single widget, can be a screen, and that UI will have a state, and this state is going to fetch data from our repository, is going to fetch data from our services, and those data are going to be deserialized from our model. So that's how it's going to work. And as you can see in this diagram, we have in our UI, we have functions that are going to call the state, and whenever the state changes, it's going to emit state to the UI, and from there we change the UI based on the state that is being emitted from the UI and from the state file. And as well, in the state, we'll also make some network requests to our services or maybe our repository, and we expect a response, and the response could be an error, and it could be a success, and from there we can use the state there and change the UI based on that. So that's how we are going to use the states, and I hope you guys are ready for this. I'm going to start with provider with this, and as time goes on, we are going to add code for the block pattern and everything you need to know. So let's get to the coding side. In order for us to test how state works and the build context, it's going to help us on this app. We are going to showcase that on how we can do that. So here it is in our Flutter app. Here you can see that on the home we have this wrapper, and I have just created a new screen called counter app, and in our screens you can see here that I have this new screen called counter app. And the reason for this is for us to demonstrate how we are going to be changing state, and also how we are going to use provider as well. So we are going to use set state, and we will see the reason why we should not use set state, and we are going to use provider and also see the reason why we should use provider. And so that's how we are going to do it here, and let's go. So you can see here in the counter app, we don't have any state here, just stateless. It just display it just like this. We really want to have state in this, so we need to change this to a stateful widget. So you can just click on this bulb here and convert to stateful widget. So now our app has states now, and I'm going to make this bigger so you can see. Bring this down. So our app has state now. So let's kind of create a field here. Let's create a variable here, an int called, maybe let's call it counter, and it's going to be a private variable, and here we can then pass this counter in here and save. You can see it's still 0. And what's next we are going to be doing is whenever we click on this on press, we want to change it, increment it to a different number, like as it is in 0 now. When you click on it, it increments to 1 and so forth. So we need to create a function, a method in this stateful widget, and here we can just create increment. It's going to be private as well, increment counter. So that's going to be it, and here we will just do counter, and we'll just use is equals to this plus 1. So that's what we'll do. And as well, we put this in a state set state. So whenever you call the set state, the build method here gets rebuild, and you can see the value of what you want. And we'll call this counter increment counter in our onPress method here. You can just call it this way. And let's press the add icon here. So if you click on it, you can see everything is changing. So that's how it's going to be. Now what if this widget gets really long, like it grows a lot, and we want to keep this particular widget, we want to separate it, we want to extract the floating action button to a different widget, and as well extract the text widget as well to a different widget. How do we do that? That's going to be something we need to be passing things now. So let's just do that and try and see. I'm going to remove this for now, and I'm going to extract this. I'm call it addition, okay, increment widgets, increment widget. And you can see here that in here we need, before we can use this increment counter, we need to pass in here so we can use it in this widget. So we are going to do that. We are going to pass in I'm going to call this callback, and I'm going to pass in the increment counter here, and this I'm going to make it a tier of, and we can just create that here, and we create it as a final variable here, and we add this to the constructor, and we make this required. We'll make this required, and we add the callback just here. And if we save this and run this again, we can just click, and you can see it's still changing. So what next? If we should do this, we will also need to pass in the counter as a constructor, as a parameter in the constructor, and so we can use that. That's not what we want in our app. Our app is going to grow and have many screens, so we don't want to be passing things everywhere in every widget we want to have. Maybe want to change states to. So that's where the provider comes in. The provider is going to help us use this context to locate anything in the widget 3, and you just like the team of context is using the text theme to give us what the style of the text theme we want. That's how we are going to use the provider and the context to do. So first, what do you do before you start using provider? You get the provider package. First, let's go there and we'll copy the provider package, the ID for that, and we'll go to popspec.yml file, and we'll go to the dependencies here and add that and save it. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back to our counter app here, and here I'm going to create a new file called counter state, and in here I'm going to call this class. I'm going to call it counter state, and I'm going to extend change notifier, and here we are going to have that counter here, and I'm going to set the initial value to 0, and I'm going to have that increment counter here, increment counter, and in here is going to increment it. This way we can use this instead of the other addition one, and we call this notify listeners. So that's just what we are going to do, and everything will start working. So one of the things also we are going to do now is for us to actually register this so we can use it. So in our app here, app.dat, we need to register that state, that counter state here. So I'm going to wrap this with a change notifier, a change notifier provider, and this has a value here we need to call, and this is going to take in a build context, which we don't need. We are going to call counter states, and this is how it's going to be. So let's run this and let's change this back to a stateless widget. We don't need it to be stateful, and we'll just change this to stateless. And what we're going to do here is for us to just do state final states, and we'll do context wash, and from here we'll just import provider here and for the wash, and we can just locate the counter states, and from here we'll get everything from the state, and we can just call in our context. So let's call in the context and the counter here, and do same for the increment counter here. So let's run this, let's restart this, and go back here and click, and everything is working. So now we can just do one thing here. We can extract this as a text. We just call it counter text. The different widgets, just remove all of this, and we can as well remove this. We don't need all of this. You can just get this, and in the counter text we will remove the state here as well, remove this, so it will be free. Just here we need a listener, and which we are calling the wash. And if we use this on the incremental part, we can just use it like this. We remove this, remove the callback here. We don't need all of that, and we can use the read instead here. So we can I'm going to explain that as time goes on, so I don't want to bother you guys. So it's going to be called increment counter, and if you run it, I'll just mark this as const. You can see in our counter app now we just have scaffold, center text, increment widget. So that's how cool using a provider is. So I've just run it, and clicking on this we still have everything changing. So that's how we'll be using the provider for this food delivery app. Just